meetings to avoid interference. In case, then we can assess if it's okay to open the mic, or just to ask you to type your questions for the two speakers in the chat. So, Anna Margherita, I give you the
yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces here. On behalf of the organizing committee of the Social and Solidarity Economy Conference, International Conference, I would like to warmly welcome all of you. This webinar today is part of a webinar series that is replacing the presential conference, the live conference that was supposed to take place last year, but which did not because of reasons that we all know very well, because of the pandemic. We were planning to postpone that edition to November 2021, but unfortunately, given how uneven the vaccination campaign is being rolled out across the world, we realized that it would not be possible to have a truly inclusive live international conference this year. So we're postponing the live event once again to 2022, hopefully in the springtime, or hopefully around May. Let's see, let's keep our fingers crossed. But meanwhile, until we'll be able to have a live event again, we'll keep on building community and exchanging ideas and building projects through the technological instruments we have at our disposal, and which allow us to keep in touch and to build community despite the need for physical distance. So although we are physically distant from each other, that doesn't mean that we're apart. Just the opposite. What is understood and promoted as social distancing is actually, at least for people who are on our wavelength, a combination between physical distancing as a necessity in current times, temporary physical distancing, and social solidarity and common goals. So, Michele, thank you so much for organizing this session. It's great to have new people joining the team and bringing in fresh ideas, fresh insights, and expanding our network. So, the floor is open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Margherita. And let me say that I'm also really happy to be here today, because I remember your conference in the wonderful setting of Lisbon, and I think that for me probably was the last conference in a pre-COVID time, when the world was the place we remember, and we could travel easily from everywhere in the world to Lisbon and enjoy conference, stay together, and also after conference dinner. That was really nice. And I'm also very keen to be part of this webinar, and had the possibility to share with you the research of two colleagues, but also two people that I had occasion to collaborate with, and Dr. Jacopo Sforzi and Professor Marcelo Vieta, that now I'm going to introduce you better. And generally, I decided to organize this webinar on the topic of how social and solidarity economics can manage and take care of commons, because I think that after this year and a half, it's of course really the time to look forward to the future and see how we want to rebuild the society, how we want to restructure the economy. And it's, of course, it's clear for everyone how this process has already begun in Europe, and in European Union is working for a recovery plan, and of course the same in North America, where countries are working to set a plan to regenerate economies, and we hope with a very strong, sustainable approach. We're going to talk about a lot of things today because topics are really interesting, but also really, really complex and going to involve many other thematics that are really important, in my opinion, for the social and solidaric economy, which probably in this crisis is going to demonstrate again its important role and doing another step towards the affirmation of its centrality in our lives and our society. It's important to understand what is going on both in Europe and in North America, because, of course, in a very Western society perspective, and of course, have to recognize that what we are going to talk about today is mostly about Western countries, even if it's really applicable to other parts of the world, but it's the bias is, of course, this. But we are going to talk about community development, work, how to save enterprises, how to reconnect the economy to society, to people, recentering what is really, really important in this economy. And Dr. Jacopo Sforzi is a senior researcher at the European Research Institute for Social Economy and Social Enterprise and Cooperatives. And he's an expert in community enterprises, and he's going to present his work, his research on Italian community cooperative sectors. And then will be the turn of Professor Marcelo Vieta from the Ontario Institute for Study and Education at the University of Toronto. And he's an expert in cooperatives, in workers' buyouts, and in empresas recuperadas, which is a specific South American model of fight against the capitalism to the reappropriation of the assets by workers. So I don't want to take any more time to choose speakers. They are going to tell us a lot of very, very interesting topics. So Jacopo, the floor is yours. And thank you again for being here, both of you and all the audience.
Yes, thank you, Michele, for inviting me in this opportunity. Thank you for to the organizer for organizing these online events. Good afternoon to everyone. Thanks to be here. I'm going to share my presentation. Let me know if you see the presentation. Everyone can see the presentation? Yes? Okay, perfect. So, as Michele said, I will talk about community enterprises in Italy and how it's possible to regenerate territories thanks to this new kind of organization. First of all, I think that it's when we talk about the possibility of local community to start a new development process, I think we can think about two main roads. The first one is that the local community can ask help or wait for an external intervention by public intervention. If you think about public policy, now we have to think about this special period in Europe, so we can think about policies like the Recovery and Resilience Plan. But in general, as we can see in this slide, Europe use a lot of strategy in order to try to involve the local community in redevelop and find a new solution for their local development. The second road is related to the capacity of local community to react to social and economic change by promote autonomous entrepreneurial initiative. So now I will talk about this second road, but I think these two roads are very connected because local community sometimes have this capacity to promote autonomous initiative. Sometimes they need help from external intervention in order to develop this kind of capacity. In the last years, more and more identified as protagonists on territorial development, local communities, now it's a sort of key concept when we think about to promote business solution and public policies. When we think about this, I think that it's very important to think that in recent times, new local initiatives are spreading all around Europe, but I think also all around the world, in order to promote a new different opportunity, a new different solution. And these initiatives are sort of a result of the volunteer of people who live inside of the community. So people who decide to live in rural or urban areas, who decide to work there, and who decide to cooperate, to undertake collective action, so to work together in a new way, in different ways, in order to produce new kind of goods and services, in order to give answer to the specificity of problems and needs of their community, in order, of course, to improve the quality of life of the community, so to increase their living condition, so create, for instance, a new job opportunity. If you think about a lot of rural areas, they are considered marginalized rural areas because they face problems with, for instance, the population, because people that they don't have the opportunity to find a job or they don't have enough public services, decide to move in another place. So first of all, if you want to have a new opportunity for these people to remain in their inside of their community, or to involve other people from other countries or localities to move in a specific place, first of all, it's very important to create a job opportunity, but it's also important to create services, different kinds of services like social services, health services, cultural services, and so on. So the protagonists of this community initiative are local actors. These local actors can be individuals, can be people who already produce inside of this kind of community, can be enterprises, can be local administration, can be also a third sector organization like association, like social cooperatives, and so on. So local actors who decide, first of all, to take control of their development pathways and to enhance scarcely used local resources. So local actors, new local actors that decide to implement new strategies in order to reorienting and organize the local production towards a more inclusive and equitable logic. And this, I think, it's a very important aspect, because when we think about capitalism model, now we know that different localities have different opportunity, because the market and a lot of public policies influence the capacity of different local communities to have their own development. So also the disparities among local communities is not just created because people inside of these communities have different capacity, but also because the market and the public policies influence this kind of development. Nowadays, in many countries, these community initiatives are called community enterprises, while in Italy, they take the form of community cooperative enterprises, because the majority of them are cooperatives. So when we think about community cooperative enterprises in Italy, first of all, we have to think that they are new socio-economic entities that represent a new way, first of all, to give new answer to the process of globalization and market change. So they try to redefine the market economy, redefine also the relationship between social and economic goals. So the idea is not just to follow economic goals, but to think how it's possible to embed the economic activities inside of the community, so to create this strong link between social and economic aspect. In order to do that, of course, it's fundamental to strengthen or rebuild the social cohesion within the local community. So we will see that this kind of community cooperatives are very spread nowadays all around Italy, but are not easy to set up. Because, of course, even if in a small community, usually there are some tension, there are some people that prefer to promote their own interest instead of the interest of the community. So the idea of these community cooperatives, enterprises, is also to try to rebuild this cohesion inside of the community and to help the people inside the community to work together and to change the mentality of their own development. So they, in order to do that, they provide innovative solution in order to satisfy the specific needs that are strictly connected with the community. And these community cooperatives come out both in rural areas and in urban areas, different areas with different problems, with different needs. But now we can see that in Italy, this new organization model can be useful both in these kind of areas. Of course, when we think about community enterprises, it's not possible to think that all the community decide one day to come all together and work together in order to set up this kind of enterprises. So, of course, these enterprises are usually promoted by a small group, a really cohesive small group, or by some strong leader at local level. Sometimes we saw that there is a very important role played by the local administration, by the mayor of the community, that try to involve with some public events the community and to put all the people around an idea, a project, in order to interact with them and try to understand how it's possible to set up this kind of enterprises and how it's possible to promote a new opportunity for the community. So these cohesive groups usually are capable to generate a sort of agreement around the project, to assume the business risk. And it's not a simple problem, because of course when we talk about working together, sometimes it's easy if you have all the same mentality, the same values, so we share the same object and the same goals. But sometimes when we must set up an enterprises, when we must invest inside of the enterprises, usually we saw that a lot of community decide to wait, because probably sometimes they don't have enough money in order to do that, but sometimes also because they don't want to assume this business risk. So we saw in our research that, for instance, in some places, when they start to think about to set up these community enterprises, there was inside of a community, the majority of the community was involved in this project, but at the end, when they decide to sign and to set up the community cooperatives, at the end they remain in 20, 30 people when there was 10 or 200, it was 100 or 200 people. So this cohesive group must assume this business risk. Then they work, and they must to work in order to engage the local community, so to engage also the people that they don't want to become member, but they must engage them in order to provide them new goods and services, but also to involve them inside of the enterprises in order to decide which are the activities that the enterprises must to set up and provide, which kind of strategies they must to adopt in order to manage the enterprises, in order to manage also the economic resources. To do that, they adopt an inclusive governance, so all the people can become member of the community enterprises. Of course, if they don't want, they can stay outside of the enterprises, but thanks to this kind of inclusive governance, these people, even if are not members of the cooperatives, can decide through different kinds of instruments and participation tools, can also participate on the management of the cooperatives and on the strategies that the cooperatives set up and which kind of activities they do. They usually adopt a strategy of diversification of the economic activities. Usually this kind of community cooperatives, they doesn't work on just on one sector, but they decide to work on many different sectors. Usually they decide which are the main economic sector, so which kind of activities are on the market, like for instance, tourism or agricultural activities. Thanks to these kind of activities, they can do profit, and then they decide to reinvest the surplus inside of the community, doing in activities that are less able to create profit, like for instance, social services or health services and so on. The idea behind this strategy of diversification is to help to maintain a better relation structure within the community, to increase the capability to access to external economic resources, to produce both social and economic benefit inside of the community. Nowadays, a research that we have conducted as a RICS last year found that in Italy we have 109 community cooperatives and enterprises. They are more or less spread all around Italy. In some regions, these are the number of these enterprises are higher than in other regions, because the increasing of these community enterprises in the last 2 years has been possible also because behind them there was the rule. For this reason, as I said when I started the presentation, it's important to have also an external influence and external intervention. These community cooperatives are set up also thanks by the cooperative movement in Italy, both Lega Coop and Conf Cooperative. They start a lot of opportunity in order to set up this kind of enterprises, and they finance the startup of these enterprises. But at the same time, there was 12 regions in Italy that recognize these kind of community enterprises by special regional law, and two of these Italian regions bring them also economic and finance opportunity in order to set up the cooperatives, so for the startup phase. So for this reason, for instance, in Tuscany, that it's the region that where there is 24 community enterprises, nowadays the number is increased a lot because also last year, during the pandemic and situation, the number of these initiatives increased. So nowadays we have around 150 community cooperatives, and this number has increased for two main reasons. First, because of course there are some economic intervention in order to set up this, but also because there was also because during this pandemic situation, when a lot of local community has been isolated, they decided to organize themselves in order to provide a new kind of social and security services. The main motivation here, a slide of the main motivation related to set up this kind of community enterprises, and you can find the first three was strengthening and rebuilding social fabric, fighting the rural population, and answer to specific needs. The main area of activities are tourism and agricultural sector, as I said, because are economic activities, so are sector that can be on the market, but also they provide also a lot of public services. Each of community cooperative enterprises, of course, are different according to their territory and to their specific local factors. Local factors that, of course, are completely different among all the region, but also inside of the region among different localities. And even if it's important to have economic resources and natural resources, I think that public policies must invest especially in social and institutional resources, in order to increase the propensity to entrepreneurship, to increase the social networks, and to increase cooperation and collective action. To do that, I think that it's very important for the public policy to rethink their activities. So, just to conclude, in summary, community cooperatives show that it's very important to rethink both the role of enterprises and the role of public policies in order to rethink how it's possible to create new local development opportunity for local community. Rethinking both economic models and public intervention is fundamental because it's fundamental to place people and their well-being at the center of the development process. Find community organizations like community cooperatives able to promote new participation opportunity for the people, to strengthen the social capital at the local level, to activate new form of mutual exchange between all the members that compose the local community, and to produce integration between economic and social activities in the interest of the community. So, of course, when we think about, for instance, the recovery and resilience plan, it's fundamental not just to provide funds or to provide policy from top down to a local community, but it's very fundamental to involve the local community, to involve the people who really live in that community, who really know the needs, their needs and their problem, and to involve them, creating a sort of multi-level governance between local actors, between local municipality, between regional organization, between national organization or European organization. So it's very fundamental to rethink about it's possible to create a new kind of community organization based on the real needs of the people who day by day fight with their problem and their needs. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Jacopo. You just in time. A minute before the end.
Okay, when I saw 5 minutes, I start to run. So.
All right, and let me just say a few words. I think that it's really, really important, these topics, first of all, because I and Jacopo, we share the same aim to foster the knowledge of community cooperatives in Italy, and it's also one of the topic of my research, because I've realized during your presentation that I didn't introduce myself before, and I'm a very humble moderator, and I prefer to give you space. But I worked on community enterprises for my PhD thesis. Now I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Parma, and I work on this European research project. It's an Horizon 2020 Matilde, about rural and mountain areas and the presence of migrants for the socio-economic revitalization of this area. And these kind of enterprises, in particular in rural areas, are absolutely fundamental. But if governments will be able to interconnect them with huge investment in the infrastructure, because what community cooperatives can do is to sustain people with local services, but of course they cannot do the other mile, and of course provide people with fundamental infrastructures. But in any case, I and Jacopo, it's here now that we go travel around the world or present on online webinar to also help the movement be known also outside Italy. And it's really important. And I just want to share that if you have an interest in community economy, community enterprises, please feel free to contact us or ask more information about Italy, because the sector, it's really interesting. Nowadays, 109 cooperatives, just to tell you that before 2010, no one spoke about, had been speaking about community cooperatives in the last 11 years. The national bodies have built a movement which now counts 109 cooperatives. That is really, really extraordinary. So another expert of cooperatives is Professor Marcelo Vieta, and he well known also Italian cooperatives, because as you can understand from his name and surname, he has also an Italian background, but he's Canadian, based in London, in Toronto, at the University of Toronto, Ontario Institute for Studying Education, and he's going to tell us something about what's going on in North America about social and solidarity economy, and how people through social and solidarity economy instruments are trying to fight back this new crisis. So Marcelo, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. I'm just trying to see if I can see you all. I find it a little unsettling when I can't see anybody. Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers of the Social and Solidarity Economy International Conference, and thank you for inviting me, Michele. I've titled my talk today, Pathways to the Cooperative Economy via Conversion of Enterprises into Cooperatives. And I want to share with you lessons that I learned, and hopefully I can share with you on Italy's worker buyouts and a new project that I have, or not a new project that's nearing its end, but a project that I'm currently working on and leading. This is business conversions to cooperatives in Canada. When I was doing work on Italy, I was working at UDIXE, that's where the project started, and I worked in the office next to Jacopo. And it was through that work there that I met ultimately Michele, and we all collaborated on other things. So the outline of my talk today is I want to quickly go over what the conversion of companies to cooperatives is, conceptualize it, and the need for it, and argue for the need for it. I want to go over some of the highlights of the work in Italy with worker buyouts and Legge Marcora buyouts, and then the work I'm doing in Canada. So let me start with some concepts and the need for the conversion of businesses into cooperatives. Why is this important? First of all, we all know the capitalist system has established very unstable economies for humans and more than humans too. High inequality, environmental crisis. The workplaces that we work in are even in democratic countries amongst the remaining authoritarian places, right? Hierarchical work organizations, doesn't lead to fulfilling work. And ultimately productivity could be better if the way we organized work was different. Recurring crises, economic crises, and now we are learning epidemiological crises, and the need to move from a comparative advantage model of the global economy to what Professor Michael Schumann calls comparative resilience model, which is very much a model that Jacopo was just going over with community cooperative enterprises in Italy. We need to think more about subsidiarity at the local level, privilege the local. We need to practice a precautionary principle, and that's not introduce any innovation that can potentially be hazardous until we're sure of the consequences. And the principle of affected interests, bring into the decision-making fray those that are actually most impacted by decisions. So this is kind of the what is demanding of alternatives in work and workplaces, and other ways of envisioning workplaces. pathways to bolster the social and solidarity economy are many. I focus on workplaces and work, so labor and workplaces primarily, but also on communities as well. I am taken by and use the diverse economies framework to conceptualize an economy. An economy is not just the capitalist economy, but an economy, as we know, is a plurality. It's a pluriverse of organizations and people. And so the areas that I'll be focusing on today in particular are alternative capitalist workplaces and non-capitalist workplaces. And this is kind of the area that I'm focusing on. I also want to introduce to you and argue that what I'll be talking about is the labor commons. I've written about this elsewhere. That is, the labor commons is where labor community managed cooperatives exist. That is, the labor or the community hires capital, not capital hiring labor and work. Work and what's produced is socialized. Surpluses are distributed equitably and amongst those that actually do the production. And conversions to cooperatives of private businesses to cooperatives are a space where this commoning and commons and commonwealth building happens. So that's kind of, I wanted to orient my presentations today and my two major case studies within this social and solidarity economy space of work. So there's three major pathways to democratize companies into co-ops that we find in the world today. We have labor conflict conversions. These are places where, workspaces where there's some conflict between workers and the owners or workers in the state, and the company enters crisis. This is primarily what happened in the last 20 years in Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, where we find worker recuperated enterprises. It's conflict driven, conflict motivated, and initially it's their defensive actions by workers to save jobs. Negotiated conversions are those that are found in Italy, France, Spain, Canada, and especially Quebec. And these offer clear worker buyout or community buyout pathways. They're usually often led by owners, unions might be involved, the cooperative sector is involved, and there's some kind of financing model and legislative framework. And then partial conversions are conversions of workplaces and organizations where the community or workers take on partial ownership and or partial decision-making rights. And I'll suspend that, but there are a lot of ESOPs are one example of that in Quebec's worker shareholder co-ops. I'm looking at all of these in my research, but in particular today, I'm going to focus on the negotiated conversion model. I already mentioned where they're mostly found. There are 6 major countries where conversions to co-ops are predominant: France, Spain, Italy, Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, to a lesser extent Canada and the US, and I'm doing research in Canada right now. Labor conflict, I've studied this a lot in Argentina, and this is my book that just came out last year. If you want to read a synopsis of the book before reading the 600 and so pages, you can find reviews of the book in the British Journal of Industrial Relations, and it's coming out in Socialism and Democracy as well. So I won't be talking about Argentina today, but I spent a lot of time in Argentina in labor conflict conversions. I want to talk about primarily negotiated conversions because this is what's most common and most known and most readily accessible in Europe and in the global north as well. So let me review Italy and my work in Italy. Worker buyouts, mostly driven by macro and microeconomic crises of firms due to broader issues of the Italian political economy over the past 15 years, and to a lesser extent, owner succession issues. Various publications came out of the work that I started at UDICSE and then continued as a professor at the University of Toronto. Here are some of the publications that my work has been found in. And I'm really gratified to know that the Italian government and the European Union have taken up this work that I collaborated on with Antonella Carano and Sara De Pedri from URICSE as well. And so this is very gratifying to me. I see my work cited in, or our work cited in by Italian legislators and European legislators. So the work continues now. I understand I'm kind of consulting with a PhD student that is doing work on updating the database that we established. So I'm still involved to some degree or another. So Italy's worker buyout model is rooted in a basic set of kind of a tool chest of legislation grounded in the Marcora law, or Legge Marcora. It's a national legislation and financing model. It's an enabling environment for conversions of firms in crises into co-ops. It has a long history in Italy, and it's why does this emerge in Italy? Italy has a strong history of cooperativism, a strong labor movement, social Catholicism and red unionism, and strong social networks that I'll show you. This is where they emerge as well. This is an Italian road to saving jobs in the economy, and a third way, according to Italian legislators, that tap into the entrepreneurial possibilities of workers. It's a negotiated model between workers, business owners, the cooperative movement, and the Italian state. And this is a snapshot of, and it's pretty complicated what the worker buyout model is in Italy, but this is a snapshot. Workers basically have a right of first refusal in Italy to buy out the firm if it's in crisis, if it's closing. They can also tap into, and this is a really innovative part, there are many self-financing mechanisms, including their unemployment insurance. They can take their unemployment insurance and say, we're going to use this to buy out the firm. This is really innovative. Spain has picked up on this model too. It's called the Pago Único in Spain. And this is something I'm trying to convince the Canadian cooperative sector to lobby the Canadian government to do right now. Business owners have a viable option of passing on the firm and continuing their legacy by passing it on to the experts of the firm, which are the workers. The cooperative movement is heavily involved in Italy. All co-ops have to give 3% of net revenues to the cooperative movement in what's called a mutualistic fund. Workers can use that mutualistic fund from the cooperative that's collected by the cooperative sector to then fund these conversions. And the Italian state offers through Cooperazione Finanza Imprese, which is intervened by the Ministry of the Economy and Social Development. They have two funds, a soft loans fund and a grant fund. CFAE is the principal organization that invests into these firms that are being converted, and there's a unique model in Italy of the financial investor, that the CFA becomes a investitore, our financial investor, and they are in the firm for 10 years, up to 10 years, and they help the firm and the workers convert and ultimately stabilize the firm. So this is what's really innovative. We have three major models of worker buyouts in Italy. We also have crisis-driven models, but primarily worker buyouts emerge in Italy from firms that are in crisis, economic crisis. Secondly, from firms that have succession issues. Often the owner becomes a new member of the cooperative, so the legacy continues. And then we have Argentina-like empresas recuperadas, or worker recuperated enterprises. Two famous ones, one is in Rome, Officina Zero, one is in Milan. Worker buyouts kind of parallel the political economy or respond to the political economy of Italy. Two major situations that have seen more or less worker buyouts emerge in Italy is the increasing depletion of the industrial sector in Italy. And as less firms emerge or firms close, this has been one response to that. And you see a net loss of businesses in Italy over the past 30 years. This graph kind of documents that. And also as the GDP falls, worker buyouts go up. And as the GDP goes up, worker buyouts go down. Unemployment also, it follows unemployment rates. Where are they located? Similar to what Jacopo pointed out. Oh, that's the next slide. Let me just talk about, they're mostly in the manufacturing sector. And this is not coincidental because a lot of them are found in Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna and Lombardia. So in the Made in Italy area sector, regions of Italy, and in the Northeast. So these are mostly manufacturing. It's the manufacturing sector, the small and medium-sized businesses in the manufacturing sector, and most of them all micro enterprises, and then secondly, middle-sized enterprises. That the loss in the Italian economy has primarily happened in these sectors as well. And they're found in what I have been calling worker buyout business clusters that emulate some of what Jacopo was talking about in what's called the Made in Italy districts. So this is where, for example, in Parma, you see several worker buyouts in Parma or in Ravenna. In each one of these areas are specialists in something, either leather goods or like Umbria, for example, leather goods, Tuscany leather goods as well. So you see worker buyouts in small leather related shops. And now you also see the Legge Marcora and this model used for the reclamation of mafia assets or criminally owned assets to community, and often they convert to community co-ops as well. So this is the other usage of the model. So lessons from Italy: these worker buyouts are tenacious. They ride out macro and micro crises really well. And they lead to stable economies, local economies. They're present in labor-intensive sectors for reasons that we can talk about, but not only. You also see them in heavier industry. And I've been to one, for example, Raviplast or Phoenix Pharma. These are heavy and capital-intensive sectors that emulate, or Italcables, that emulate Mondragon, for example. They tend to emerge we're in communities with strong networks, strong inter-firm and intra-firm networks, and why these emerge in Italy and why they're an inspiration for other places increasingly in Europe. And Belgium is now looking at ways of, and Slovenia is looking at a Marcora for Slovenia, right? Currently, this is a project that's in place. It's because this offers this model, this financing and legislative model offers strong enabling environment for saving local economies and jobs. That's bottom line, and it's been proven in Italy. And so those are some of the lessons that we learned for the social and solidarity economy for building a labor commons in Italy. Let me now turn to my Canadian project. These are also negotiated conversions, but they're mostly about SME owners, small and medium-sized enterprise owners, unable to fulfill their succession. And so some of them have been turning increasingly to, when they retire, to seeding firms to the community. So I used many of the same methodological ways of approaching the work that I did in Italy, in Argentina, and now in Canada. So the project is called the Conversions to Cooperatives Project, or Co-op Convert, and it's a collaboration, a partnership between two universities, the University of Toronto, my center, the center where I work in, the Center for Learning, Social Economy and Work, IDECUS at the University of Sherbrooke, Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, which is Canada's national cooperative apex organization, and it's funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Council of Canada. Motivations for the project, basically, in a nutshell, there's about 1.2 million employer firms, small and medium-sized enterprises in Canada. 72% of their owners plan on retiring, but only 14% of them have a formal succession model. So there's what's called a gray tsunami emerging. And now with COVID, you see an increasing number of businesses closing in Canada. So business conversions to cooperatives are a solution to saving firms. And we're not only looking at worker co-ops in in Canada, we're also looking at community recuperations as well. So we have two major objectives to the project, which is to identify a potential enabling environment, or what currently exists in Canada. And I'll cover 2 or 3 of these models and findings. So we've an international scan of laws that can, and legislation that can inspire Canadian policymakers. We've established a current Canada-wide data set. We've surveyed retirement-aged SME owners to see if they know about the cooperative model and what their intentions are for retirement. And then key informant in-depth semi-structured interviews. And we've created also a database of these firms. And also we want to build capacity for the Canadian cooperative sector and the community economic development sector. So here we see that we find business conversions to cooperatives predominantly in Quebec. This is not a coincidence because Quebec has a strong social and solidarity economy, strong legislation and strong financing, similar in many ways to Italy and France. The rest of Canada has a more Anglo-Saxon approach, and we don't see as many. We see there's a large-ish cooperative sector in Canada, but we don't see many conversions in Canada because primarily people and owners and workers don't know about it. That's what we've found out. So they're also present across the Canadian economy. But interestingly, 61 of our business conversions to cooperatives, or 40%, are in the services sector. So information and professional services, education, health, arts, and recreation. This is because these organizations, these businesses, are more ingrained and ensconced in the community. So it's easier to make a community cooperative out of these. They're anchor businesses for small and medium-sized towns, which is where primarily we find business conversions to co-ops in Canada. So we're doing extensive case studies. We have about 15 case studies that we'll be publishing very shortly. This is something that the cooperative sector and professionals that are involved in conversions to co-ops in Canada has asked us to do. Innovative and inspiring cases, and here are some of the cases we've covered. There's a community recuperated theater called Aaron Theater. We don't have in Canada, we don't have a community cooperative enterprise model, but they use the consumer cooperative or multi-stakeholder or worker cooperative model primarily. There's a healthcare. Healthcare right now is a big issue in Canada, and so this is being looked at, especially around COVID. The Quebec ambulance sector, a big portion of that is worker recuperated enterprises, business conversions to co-ops, and the funeral sector in Quebec as well. So these are a breakdown of the type of cooperatives that they become. Worker shareholder cooperative is an interesting Quebec model, where workers can form a cooperative of workers and co-own the business together with more traditional investors. So we find that 20% of business conversions to cooperatives in Canada are those types. And then mergers, and then other ways that the primary conversion model are conversions to co-ops. Sorry, I'm finding that I got to plug in my computer. 1 second. There you go. Okay, I almost lost us. I forgot to plug in my computer. Okay. I'm almost done. So we're also mapping a BCC, or business conversion to cooperative ecosystem for Canada. And we're also looking at and scanning best practices internationally to inform policy and facilitate conversions to co-ops in Canada. And then lastly, I want to talk about a major survey we conducted of small and medium-sized business owners. This is a representative sample. We worked with a community research firm called Modus Research, and part of the funding that I got went to paying them and having them help us. And so we got a truly representative sample of 320 retirement age owners, and we asked them about their attitudes, what their intentions were for retirement, and would they convert to cooperative. And it was really interesting what we found. Well, what we found, this report is already written, it's on our website, but it hasn't been formally announced yet. It will be, Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada will be announcing it very shortly. Only 14% of Canadian small and medium-sized business owners have a succession plan. Although 50% of them want to keep on working, they don't want to retire, right? And 48% of them find succession a real challenge. Planning for succession of their business a real challenge, very complex, very time consuming, and they don't know where to turn, right? And so the cooperative model could be a viable way for them to continue their business legacy and continue their business. This is where it's focused on in Canada, and how it can flourish more in Canada, this succession issue. Although here's the crunch, here's the problem. Few SME owners in Canada are familiar with co-ops and their strengths. In fact, a lot of them have very negative views of co-ops and a false view, a misunderstanding of what cooperatives are. So the cooperative sector has a lot of educating to do, including policymakers as to the benefits of co-ops. But here's another area that could be used, or another finding that we found that could be used as a proxy, that if business owners knew more about cooperatives, more of them would be inclined to form cooperatives. And that's 3/4 of SME owners that we interviewed believe that granting equity ownership to workers is actually a good thing for their business. So cooperatives offer equity ownership to their workers and to members, right? And so we found several proxies like this that suggest that there is a latent amenability to conversions. And really the SMEs that we found that are most amenable to conversions, and I'm almost done, are those that have SME owners that don't want to retire or stop working. This is a way that they can continue to work and not have the responsibility of owning and managing. And those owners and businesses that have a strong concern for community. So again, grocery stores, recreation-oriented, tourism-oriented, services-oriented, strong anchor organizations in local communities. Small firms, and this is the same as what I found in Italy and Argentina, small firms, less than 50 employees, and older firms. Older firms tend to have more of a vested interest in local communities. So they're more inclined to desire or want to convert to cooperative. And those in the services sector, like I said. And interestingly enough, those that also emerge from founders, not those businesses that were mergers or that came from mergers or acquisitions or even family inheritance, but those that were, the founders are still present, right? Because they want to see their legacy continue. So that's the end of my presentation. This is next steps for us. We're currently finalizing our case studies. They're written. We'll be releasing them very, very soon. And so I'll be sharing them with this network, hopefully, and others. We're documenting a conversion process in Vancouver, Canada. We're documenting the whole process. There isn't a way of doing this in Canada. It's more ad hoc. So we're trying to kind of map it out to see if we can document this. We are establishing a diagnostic tool for sellers of businesses with the Ontario Cooperative Association. And this was a response to a call by the government of Canada to respond to the COVID crisis. How could we, and the way we positioned it was working with the OCA to position a tool to save Main Street, to save local economies. And so can we establish a diagnostic tool that sellers of businesses can go to and connect with buyers or workers or communities. And we'll be writing a best practices report. We're currently doing this, BCC best practices report, and a landscape report, kind of similar to what we did in Italy, and mapping out how conversions happen in Italy. I'll stop there and look forward to the conversation.
Yes, all right. Thank you, and thank you again. Another really, really interesting presentation that stress the importance of how social and solidarity economy can re-centralize certain important topics and assets for the regeneration of our societies after this year, and also let's not forget the 10 years of economic crisis after the 2008 stock exchange crash. We are going to have a question and answer section. Before, just let me have a very quick overview on the different topics. I think that it is really important to understand which are the new trends, the new dynamics in social and solidarity economy in different countries, because it's really important to understand what is going on and learn new and learn something new from different experiences, because this is something, the social and solidarity economy, that acts at the local level and involves people directly, and also help them to think about what's going on in their communities and what is going on in their socio-economic context. Moreover, is a way to produce resources but not for profits or returns on investment, but it's a way to produce resources for the common goods of people. And I think this process is really fundamental because it's a way also to engage people and to ask them to really focus on what is going on in their communities and in their local economies, and ask them is to think about what can be the future of these communities and economies, considering that we have an agenda 2030 set by a United Nations with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. That is a perfect frameworks to read these dynamics and help these initiatives to enhance their impacts in the local communities. So the cooperatives is a very old instrument that can help these social solidarity economy initiatives to foster their actions at the local level. And well, thank you again to Jacopo and Marcelo for this wonderful presentation. So I might have a question, but first I would like to ask if someone else wants to jump in the discussion with some questions. I know that for pre-established settings, all mics are closed, but I think Sophia, we can open because we are small groups of colleagues. It's better to discuss instead of ask people to write in the chat. So Kostis, I hope the pronunciation is right.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion, and I enjoyed both presentations a lot. Mainly my question would be for Marcelo, but I think also Jacopo, if wants to jump in and say something. So I'm following your work many years on cooperatives, on radical cooperativism and workers' movements. And I was wondering, because now we're talking about the second pathway that you mentioned, the negotiated conversions, how different it is from the first one, how did you name it? I have it here, labor conflict conversion. And by this, I'm mainly interested in, let's say, a more political reading of this kind of ventures, of projects. And I will stop there. I mean, I think it is clear what I want to ask. Thank you.
Should I answer, or should we take a series of questions, or should I just answer?
Yeah, let's go. So we can just give immediate answer, and we don't disconnect too much the questions from the answers.
Okay, my short and self-interested question is, you can compare my book, Worker Self-Management in Argentina, and read that and compare it to the Italian report. but I'm not going to force you to read it. I'll kind of summarize it. Yes, so I found that in Argentina, there's more politicization that happens, and that these are generalities. Right? Each workplace is slightly different and has their own particularities, but the process of having to go through much conflict, occupying, the slogan is occupy, resist, produce in Argentina amongst the worker recuperated enterprise movement. So occupying for a long period of time, resisting repression, and then struggling to start production again of a bankrupt, often bankrupt firm. That process politicizes workers, and they told me this. I have lots of quotes and lots of stories in the book. So that does politicize workers, that they become more attuned to other social issues, to political issues, helping other social movements and other worker organizations and labor organizations. That's definitely what I found in Argentina. But initially, I think they both have a similar negotiated and labor conflict, have similar initial reasons that workers and communities would do these difficult transitions and conversions, and that's defensive. That's so to save jobs. It's no more complicated than that ultimately, right? At the beginning, especially when there's deep crisis in this political economy, which was happening in Argentina when these first emerged in the mid to late 90s, right? It's in the midst of really volatile system where the country went through a lot of financial crisis. In Italy, you see this, it's more long-term. In Italy, it's this long and process of, economic depression and recession and a depleting industrial sector, especially manufacturing sector. No, I should say manufacturing sector, especially small and medium-sized firms. These firms where it's high skilled, low capital, workers have generations of, shoemakers, right? And it's a shop where it's maybe 5 people, maybe 2 people, maybe 3 people, maybe 10 people, right? In these really densely, kind of dense manufacturing sectors where they produce products for one kind of stream of the economy, right? That there are different reasons why workers would want to save those firms. There's less social mobility in Italy, for example, than there is in Canada. So these workers want to stay in their communities, right? But what we also found is, and we also, something that's not picked up by, we picked this up, we studied worker buyouts in Trento. Now, Trento is interesting because it's not, it doesn't fall into the Legge Marcora model because of its autonomous designation. So it's often missed that there are worker buyouts in Trento, really interesting. So we went to a firm called Anita in Val d'Enon or something like that. And there was this person we interviewed, he was in his 70s. I had been working there for 30 years. And it was a worker buyout. And I didn't sense in these interviews, Scalvensi in the province of Brescia, I didn't sense a politicization amongst workers. This kind of model that's already in place, it seems, even in Trento, it seems to be where there's the Cooperative Association of Trento is involved in these conversions. There seems to be this institutionalization that prevents this kind of radical, more politicized shop floor of these workers. And we did find this also in the survey that we conducted in Italy. Although I don't mean to generalize, there's other shops that I've been to that also tapped into Legge Marcora and were really politicized workers. And then you go to Rimaflo in Milan, and it followed the Italian model. It didn't use this legislation and financing, and it was bottom-up, union-driven, community-driven, and you see radical. Michele and I did interviews there and really, really radicalized workers. So the crisis seems to radicalize folks, right? Having to deal with crisis collectively and together seems to radicalize communities and workers. And I'm wondering if there's similar findings, Jacopo, in community co-ops, that you find the more radicalized ones are in the more troubled communities and neighborhoods. I don't know. I'm still exploring this and theorizing it. But you can see the stark contrast in my book and in the Italian report.
Jacopo, want to follow up?
No, Marcelo just said a lot. I think that one of the problems is strictly connected to the local culture. Because, of course, in some places, people are used to be more radicalized, so they're used to react with the more powerful activity than in the other place where people are used to wait for something, so they're still waiting sometimes. So they need more time in order to realize that if they're still waiting, probably they never change, nothing changed. So
yeah, just a quick comment. And it's interesting that with the reduction of state, especially in Italy, the welfare state has been shrinking for decades. And so this is where you saw the emergence of social cooperatives. There's communities coming together because there was a gap that the state left. In Argentina, the state was in crisis. It lost legitimacy and it couldn't provide for its people. So workers just took matters into their own hands to save their own. So that these moments seem to, and COVID, I think the pandemic is such a moment. Although we've yet to see how this is all going to unfold, right?
Plus, if I can just add one thing from a very political science perspective, I think that also nowadays what we have to consider is that most of the social distress is also channeled in other ways, and not organized ways, and also in other political areas, more into the populist propaganda. That is another way that is very easy to follow, instead of, well, let's get together, try to organize ourselves together. Instead, we can just follow the lead of one populist leader, say, okay, everything is going wrong, we have to ask our rights back, and let's follow that way. That is maybe easier. Okay, Tyler, one second.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Michele, and thank you both, Professor Sforzi and Professor Vieta. Those were great presentations. I had a question, but maybe I'll save it for Professor Sforzi, because another question just came to mind based on Constance's question, and it has to do with, the differences between the crisis and conflict conversions versus the problems or potential problems with the negotiated conversions. So it seems to me that the real appeal for challenging of co-ops are challenging capitalist social relations and the potential for post-capitalist or perhaps even anti-capitalist transformations that could come from there, right? I think most people in this cohort would be familiar with the famous or perhaps infamous critiques of cooperatives, that they themselves are nestled within capitalist social relations, right? Of course, they're not motivated by profit alone, but it is necessary to generate profit for their survival. So it seems to me, as Marcelo did say, that labor conflict conversions set a tone for solidarity and resistance. So it's, there's a very, it's clear what's happening here. People are being dispossessed. There's crisis. People need to survive. But if negotiated conversions, like in Quebec, are based on the actual legacy of the capitalist success of the founder owners and are transferred by negotiated business transactions, are they more susceptible to mission drift? And are they going to be more susceptible to de-emphasizing their anti or post-capitalist transformative potential? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a vexed question that has been hotly debated in the left for over 100 years. Sydney and the Webbs, for example, and Rosa Luxemburg, and cooperatives are a stopgap, but Marx had a circumspectful view. We shouldn't so readily ignore the role of, for Marx, for example, cooperatives and the the 10-hour workday were the two great innovations of the working class. And that was his inspiration for some of his pamphlets and writings. So he didn't dismiss them, although he did, and then this has been picked up by the left. It has been viewed as collective, collective bosses, right? Workers become their own bosses and they self-exploit themselves in this capitalist system. So the competitive marketplace, undoubtedly, and I found this in Argentina and in Italy and finding this in Canada, the competitive marketplace does, the fact that you have to produce things faster and more cheaper than the competition does often deplete democratic governance, and that's often when it's the situation where the democracy is often left to the side, right? And so you see that the degeneration of co-ops and demutualization happens in those places. What Jacopo presented, these are, you can correct me, but these are in large part outside of the market, or direct, or in part at least. These are for other purposes other than, selling widgets, selling things in a market. These are saving a community. These are reviving old customs. This is about the commons, right? And so that's another place and another way of radicalizing and radicalization, where the cooperative model can be very useful. And I just conclude by saying that I published a paper in the Journal of the Journal of the Cultural Economics on the language of self-management, autogestión, and I spend a couple pages there going through the co-op debate amongst the left, and they have radical roots. We have to remember this. They were the first formal cooperatives had radical roots. It was a response to the worst effects of industrial capitalism, right? And so it was working people coming together and organizing their own economic affairs. And they continue to have that foundation. We often forget this, right? This is the history. But anyway, I'm just, I don't know if I'm answering directly the question, but I think to conclude, market insertion has a large part to play in whether it's degenerates into something other than a community-oriented organization.
Yeah, I just add something that, of course, community cooperatives grow up in Italy mainly in order to save place and to save local community. But they do activities that are on the market, like, for instance, tourism activities. And it's quite strange if we look at last year, because usually when we think about tourism in Italy, we think about a big city like Florence, Venice, and we think about mass tourism. Last year, during the pandemic situation, where people, they don't want to go to the big city, they prefer to move in a small place, these kind of localities, this kind of local community increase their economic activities because a lot of people move in this small place. So I think that in front of big economic crisis, realize that we have to change the way of doing economic activities. In front of a pandemic situation, we start to change our activities, our lifestyle. So the main problem is to reflect on which is our definition of quality of life. If you want to, day by day, increase our activities, economic profit and everything, or if we have reached a point that this is enough in order to have a good quality of life, we don't need day by day more and more to produce more and more, but we are satisfied with what we have. So probably we can change the way how we want to live. For instance, in Italy now we have a big problem with the riders, the people who deliver food and stuff, that nowadays they're organizing a cooperative movement because they are, of course, unpaid and so on. But why we need to receive everything at home? It's really good, it's really helpful in order to increase our quality of life. I think that after 1 year, more or less, of lockdown, all the people want to go outside of the house, to go to the restaurant, to meet people, to go. So sometimes we think that what we have on the market, it's everything better that we still have now. And we are like under this pressure of someone else that must say us what is good or not. But if we take time to think on what is good for us, and we talk with the people, and we share our ideas, our values among people, probably it's possible to change also the way of doing economic activities. Thanks to the pandemic, a lot of small shops, they are grow up again. The big center, the shopping big center, they're closed. So also to rediscover the quality of neighborhoods. For instance, I think it's very interesting, they propose that the measure of Paris talk about the city of 15 minutes. So redefine and redesign also the city, the neighborhoods inside of the city, to find what we need in our neighborhood instead of moving outside. So I think that nowadays there are a lot of new good strategies in order to rethink of our quality of life and to think about new strategies in order to increase also our economic opportunities that are must really strictly connected with the social quality of life.
Yeah.
Please, I could maybe comment something if you allow.
Please.
Okay, hello everybody. I was listening interestingly. Thank you for your presentations and all discussions so far. My name is Jukka Peltokoski. I come from Finland, from Tampere, Finland, Tampere, and I've also been active on cooperatives. Read also Marcelo yours books about Argentina. But what I was thinking about somehow generally to comment is that if I think Finland and crisis of globalization and then now this COVID-19 and what it has caused, it doesn't cause, at least in Finland, any radicalization of workers. It's not workers who are being radicalized, or if they are becoming somehow they turn into populist parties. It's possible that after June, when we have municipal elections in Finland, so-called True Finns, which is a populist party in Finland, right-wing populist party, it's at the moment it's the second biggest party in Finland, that it's possible that it's becoming the biggest one. And that is very sad, of course. And it gets its support from collapsing working class, partly. Of course, partly also from upper classes who are dealing with national capitals and so on. So it's kind of mix of workers and then some sort of proto-fascist rich people. But what I was thinking then, what is becoming up somehow progressively in Finland is people's new interest in localities and municipal level. So, and I would maybe just openly generally ask, how do you see this kind of new becoming of municipalities? And then to make it a bit more concrete, I've thought in Finland that there could be a possibility to appeal to municipalities, that this kind of public sector, which is quite strong in Finland, as in Nordic countries in general, we have rather strong municipal structure in Nordic countries, that municipalities should make procurements, purchases more locally and buy from cooperatives, for example, because of social and environmental reasons. But then the EU law, on the other hand, it denies like supporting other enterprises over others. All enterprises should be treated equally and neutrally, actually. But then somehow we could, in principle, appeal to municipalities to make purchases from local producers who would be in its best cooperatives or other ethical local enterprises. But anyways, that could be a possibility. But then I would like to ask, how do you see this municipal new rise of municipalities? Does this bring any thoughts into your minds?
Jacopo, please.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. So I think that local municipality, it's a very interesting topic because I think especially in some place, they are very important. And the strategy that they adopt is very fundamental in order to help the local community to find their own local economic development. At the same time, I think that usually local municipality and municipality in general, public administration in general, sometimes they must redefine their rule and their way to work with the local community. For instance, now in Italy, talking about third sector, we talk about a lot of collaboration, co-creation. So the idea is that the local municipality must work together with the local association, with people, in order to really understand how it's possible to redesign the public policies, to redesign public services. But it's not easy. It's not easy because when we think about cooperation, we think about collective action, it's a problem of to put all the people, all the local actors in the same horizontal ways. And it's not easy because this means lose some power. Usually local municipalities have more power than people because they have the money, they have the political power to define the rule of the game. So if they want to really talk with the local community, they must lose in a sort of way this sort of power in order to share the power with other people, with other actors. And it's not easy. So where the public administration is made by the people that really want to do something for their local community, there they want also to put themselves in the same horizontal position with the people, so it's possible to create this change, and it's possible to create good policies. Otherwise, it's very difficult, I think.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Yuka. I think this is what I meant at the beginning when I quoted Michael Schumann, who's written about this. He calls it comparative resilience. He wants to kind of disband the global division of production and labor, so to speak, and reprioritize regions and municipalities and localities, but not that we can't trade and we can exchange, but major decisions should be happening, and major ways of provisioning for the things that we need and desire, right, should be happening at a local level. I mean, I think this crisis and Michael Schumann has some really interesting ideas around this. So not comparative advantage from Ricardo, right, but comparative resilience, that each, and we can still have regions and municipalities specializing in things and trading with others, but not at the expense of others, not at the expense of, for example, not at the beginning of the pandemic in Canada, we didn't have masks. This was, and so we couldn't produce them because we had gotten rid of all the mask production industry and shipped them to China, of all places, which is where the pandemic started. So we didn't have enough masks, right? Now we're finding this with vaccines, right? Look at Africa. I just heard today that Malawi is needing to destroy 20,000 vials of vaccine of AstraZeneca because they're going bad, because they can't get it to the people, right? I mean, this is ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous that we have patents and intellectual property that's keeping from generic vaccine, from keeping from these the vaccine recipes from being produced in Africa, right? But this is what a kind of a comparative resilience approach would do, a rethinking of the global economy, a global rethinking. And I think municipalities are central here. I think that many of the radical, even in the discussion of the Sustainable Development Goals, some of the leading economic models here are the donut economy, right? Circular economies. This is what it's all about, right? It's about, if you put in, right, what you put out has to somehow come back in again. And so Amsterdam has taken a lead on this, apparently. I read last year where the mayor of Amsterdam was inspired by the circular donut economy approach and wanted to guarantee that. So I mean, and Barcelona, you find this in Barcelona. There are lots of models in the States, in the US too. You'll find localities and regions and municipalities that are leading these new ways of envisioning economic activity. I think it's not just cooperatives, like it's a plural economy, it's a plurality. So there's other forms of organizations. I think the big thing here is get away from the profit motive. And we can do that in many ways. We don't, not just co-ops, but co-ops are an effective way of doing that. But in Italy, Stefano Zamagni has talked about, reconceptualizing just what it means to be efficient in the economy. I think a lot of innovative heterodox economic thinking comes out of Italy, and and so that's what we got to do, right? Let's efficiently produce community benefits, not profits. Let's efficiently produce things that real people need, not and I think localities are there. There's examples in some of the work that I've done. The municipality of Avellaneda purchasing the services of a construction recuperated enterprise in Argentina. I've documented this. There are other kind of this municipality of San Martin in Argentina, also favorably or purchasing from worker recovered and other kind of co-ops. Italy's full of examples, as Jacopo has talked about. So I think this is the way to go. And I think it has to start from the bottom up, because it's not going to be captains of industry and in nation states deciding at decentralized locally the economy. It's got to happen from the very municipalities and that. But you're right. And then there's this big gap. Where the communities for culture and other reasons, the right is also filling in the gap, right? And so populist, scapegoating and other types of populist strategies are also filling in the gap. So that's our real battle right now, is against those. It's trying to kind of re-seize the imagination of the working class and other community folks, right? That we can still be innovative, be creative, and be collective, rather than relying on the promises of populist right now, right? So that's what we're battling against right now.
All right. So it's 1 hour and 40 minutes, and so our time together is gone. Well, I think few people, but good audience, we can say. But in any case, thanks to the new technologies, we can share this webinar with everyone we want. It's been very, very interesting, and I'm really glad we could make it. And thank you again to our colleagues in Lisbon for this opportunity. Thank you again to everyone who has attended the webinar today, this evening, night, wherever you are in the world. And all right, I hope to see you some days in a conference somewhere, or in Lisbon for a good glass of Portuguese wine. All right.